Now, Australia has a very long and not very proud history of caving in to the US on many things, wars, economic things, and so on, of tugging the forelock. And so it was this week. It finally came. Albo's meeting with the Donald. It was much anticipated, and the mainstream media was desperately hoping for a faux pas from Albo, for a tirade from Donald, from some mishap, from some scandal. It was all set up that way, all a bit of theatre. And there was Albo, tugging the forelock for the Donald like there was no tomorrow. And of course, they got on like a house on fire. That's all you got to do with the Donald, the narcissist. The greatest tugger, in fact, in all of mankind, in all of human history, the Donald himself. And Albo, suitably, as you do, tugged the forelock. Now, the Murdoch and the other Liberal press were downcast that the meeting went so swimmingly, and they pivoted onto you-know-who, Kevin Rudd. They were trying to get Kevin sacked as ambassador all week, but Albo nixed that, said, no, we're not sacking Kevin. And Donald had no more to say on the embarrassing situation of Kevin saying something nasty about him in the past. So Albo and Donald are besties, and that's all in the past, and there was nothing to go on, not even the attacks on Rudd, on Kevin Rudd. But of course, given all this theatre, the real scam here was that the main issues afflicting the world and Australia were not dealt with at all. There were no questions. That's why they kept my old mate Johnny Lyons out of proceedings, the Washington correspondent for the ABC, because he's a real journalist that would have put Donald on the spot. We're talking about war with China, AUKUS, big trade issues. The actual deal, the rare earths deal, we've got something we've just published on the website on that, so you can see what the real picture is there, not what you fed from the machine. And the strange superannuation comments, of course, too, were not tested in the missive signed by both Donald and Albo. Instead, they went for Kevin's jugular all week. Now, this superannuation deal, we should deal with this because there's been a little bit of misunderstanding. It was a tricky announcement saying we're going to put $1 trillion into the US capital markets. I mean, where is it coming from, that lazy $1 trillion? That's $1,000 billion. The Australian superannuation sector is worth $3.4 trillion, and it's growing so much because superannuation is huge. It's a gigantic, humongous gravy train. So we have to invest more in offshore markets because the Australian market, the Australian Stock Exchange, is simply not liquid enough. It's not big enough for our superannuation system. But already, America is the biggest market in the world for both bonds, that's enormous, and for equities. So most of our investment offshore goes to America, probably about half of it already. And that's more than $500 billion, 517 million or thereabouts at the moment, the latest estimates. So the trick here is they're going to put $1 trillion in, but where's it going to come from? Well, half of that is going to be from organic growth, because you see at 7%, assuming 7% growth compound over the next 10 years to 2035, and there is 500 million. So that's where it's going to come from, a lot of it from organic growth. But there was sort of 500 million left if you want to get to 1.44 trillion, which is the number in the press release. Where's that coming from? Well, we asked the Prime Minister's office this week, but alas, because we're just a poor, down-at-heel journalist with his notepad, they didn't respond. If we were an Instagram influencer, you'd have us in a shop, because we know that Instagram influencers, these very glamorous people, they get to go and meet Albo. They get to meet Albo. So, you know, they can talk about whatever Instagram influencers do, not quite sure. But here we are. That's dominated the week completely. Our PM Albo, grovelling, tugging the forelock to a reality TV star in a cabinet, in a government of reality TV stars and weirdos. All that came out of it was really actually a letter of intent. We covered that in the last video, which isn't even an MOU, to funnel our rare earths minerals to the US because they want to undermine China's dominance in rare earths, which is strategically fair enough, but whether there is going to be a boom, as has been predicted in rare earths in Australia, who knows? It might be like the LNG boom, where the beneficiaries of the boom were US corporations, because they don't pay any tax here and they suck out our natural resources. So we're going to get more of that probably. The details yet to be furnished. So the meeting went so well with Donald, there wasn't much political capital in it for the coalition, the poor old beleaguered coalition. So Susan Lee came out strongly saying at the beginning of the week, saying just after the meeting, yes, Kevin Rudd should resign, let's make this a thing. News Corp screeching from the breaches where news goes to die. And then she did a reverse ferret later in the week. So there you go. That was the scam of the week, the theatre around that. It's a media scam. Nothing much of detail except for AUKUS, good old AUKUS, of course, which is, why wouldn't Donald be sticking to that deal? Of course he's sticking to that deal. Who gets $368 billion for free in order to take over somebody else's military bases in another country, steal their sovereignty and get them on side for a war against China? What sort of a deal is that? The best one since the Trojan horse. Now, on a purely selfish and self-indulgent note, we unveiled a couple of scams ourselves in Michael West Media this week, and we had a couple of wins. The first is the Cayman Islands Hospital, as we like to call it. It's our local hospital for the Northern Beaches of Sydney, the Northern Beaches Hospital. It has finally come back into public hands from the Cayman Islands, to which it was privatised, metaphorically that is. Not physically based in the Cayman Islands as up French's Forest, but that's where it's owned and controlled by directors and shareholders that we can't see. So it was privatised 10 years ago when the state government splashed billions, or 1.4 billion, building roads and infrastructure and hospital and car parks and everything like that. And they're going to get Healthscope, or Brookfield, who own Healthscope, the cuff-linked buccaneers from Brookfield. They're going to get $190 million for giving that back. Do they give the car parks back? That's where you really make the money in a hospital. If you've ever been to a hospital and had to park your car, good old Wilson Parking, or whoever the operator is, they'll get you. So are these money spinners going back to the government too, or does Brookfield get to keep the car parks? We might put a question in and get a no comment on that this week. But we've been on the financial shenanigans around this hospital for 8 years for the obvious reason that there's a huge conflict of interest. When you privatise a monopoly asset, an essential service to boot, you sell it to a foreign mob out of the Cayman Islands, you've got a conflict between care for patients and profits. They're not going to want to kill anyone deliberately, obviously. That's bad PR. But unfortunately, when you cut costs as much as they do, and they have, it affects patient care. And that was evident in the Auditor General's report into the Northern Beaches Hospital, which found precisely that. And so it's an unprivatisation. Occasionally you have a win in this game. You beat your head against a wall, exposing stuff, and occasionally you have a win. So that was really good, particularly for my sources that have really helped me decipher that story over the years. And the other one, so that's less money going to the Caribbean, which is a good thing. But the other one, the other scam this week, Wendy Bacon, the veteran investigative journalist who we had the privilege of working with, Wendy Bacon had a win when the cardiologist Peter McDonald was reinstated to St Vincent's Hospital to do the rounds of the wards once again after 7 weeks of suspension. 7 weeks, because the Zionist lobby, the Israel lobby, went after him for anti-Semitism. A very well-known, prominent cardiologist, according to sources, good guy, who made some off-the-cuff comments in a non-hospital forum and was then framed for anti-Semitism. So in a press release, St Vincent's and Victor Chang Institute, they bagged him. The St Vincent's press release said anti-Semitism, racism, bigotry and hate. Nothing to do with that. The comments were sceptical of Iran's involvement in false flag things in Australia. Wonder who's behind those. And reasonable speculation, to my mind. Anyway, they walked that back. The press release mysteriously vanished. They must know they've got a defamation suit on their hands, as does Victor Chang. So the press release disappeared, and Professor McDonald is back in the hospital, working once again. 7 weeks of making this guy's life misery for nothing. For the chimera of anti-Semitism, just fake anti-Semitism claims. Victor Chang is yet to backflip on their defamation of Professor McDonald. And we're going to continue to cover the shadow war because, frankly, it's huge public interest that our courts are being the courts which we fund. We fund the court system. We pay the judges. And yet here they are. Their time tied up with dealing with anti-Semitism claims. Mary Costakides, John Keane, Sydney University, Nick Reimer, using our legal system to persecute professionals and others in Australia of Muslim descent. This is a sad and sorry chapter in Australia's history, the past 2 years. You look at the latest numbers for mainstream media globally, they have just lost their mojo. They are plunging double-figure drops in online circulation for BBC, for Fox News. Australian outlets no doubt the same because they have failed to do their job and tell the story, to tell the truth objectively about the carnage in Gaza. Now, elsewhere in scams, in the world of scams, there was Cashy, Senator Michaelia Cash, in splendid form as usual, scintillating stuff from the senator, veritably railing this week about the government's broadcast tax. Oh no, why tax these media magnates? It's outrageous. Mind you, they are losing money now, big time, for reasons we've just mentioned. But as it turned out, it was the Libs that introduced it, and it was already suspended anyway. There was no broadcast tax. It had been suspended already. So that was rather amusing from Cashy. But Cashy's a routine, a regular, never-say-die contender for the privilege of winning the Scam of the Week award, the highest award in Australian politics and business. No, Cashy, we're not going to give it to you again. You just try too hard. Now, Albo, of course, transparency, trying to push his anti-transparency crackdown on FOI's reform through, calling it something, that Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, would be pleased to call it, some special name about transparency. Anyway, it came out this week and said at estimates before David Shoebridge that guess who is less transparent, ScoMo or Albo? It's the epoch of ScoMalbo. I mean, if you thought ScoMo was hiding stuff, Albo is apparently worse, the experts say, on the actual details when it comes to government transparency. Let's not forget, we pay these guys to govern in the public's interest. Yet the public, we are not allowed to know what is going on.
You have done some research on transparency, and of course FOI is just one part of government transparency. What does your research show you about the overall transparency record of the Albanese government, say, as against the Morrison government?
Thank you, Senator. Our research raises significant concerns about the Albanese government's performance on transparency via FOI analysis, as you say, but also via performance in respect of compliance with Senate orders for production of documents. So what we see is that there has been a decrease in compliance, but also an increase in reliance on public interest immunity to justify that non-compliance.
And FOI came back this week totally redacted, 100%, the Gillian Siegel stuff. The anti-Semitism envoy's junket to Israel on our taxpayer dime. I don't know what that's got to do with anti-Semitism in Australia, canoodling with this criminal regime in Israel. But in any case, if you marry Albo's track record with the bill that he's trying to shove through now on FOIs, it will make government even less accountable. This is government of the lobby groups, by the lobby groups, for the lobby groups. Step off, you voters. The game is sewn up. Yeah, they do some good stuff and they try a bit, but gee, they're disappointing when they get into government, politicians. They're much better in opposition. Transparency, they yell from the opposition benches. Yet when they get there, they do the greatest, most majestic reverse ferret you can imagine and just shut down the flow of public information. That, unfortunately, is the system. The fault of any individual, it's just the way that they are. And the money now in politics, corporatocracy, makes it that way. But don't you worry, digital ID is coming hard and fast at us, so we'll know who the troublemakers are. Don't you worry about that. Now, which brings us to an important public notice. Check out this story. This is great, from AAP Fact Check, that found this stuff online, which was AI generated, had a few experts comment on it. I mean, here, look at this stuff. Look at this AI stuff. Here's a guy with a machine gun in front of a whole lot of yuppies marching for Australia, like marching against migration, staging a revolution. I mean, is this a call to violence or not?
Our Prime Minister is refusing to take Australian citizens seriously. A civil riot is what is coming from hard-working Australians.
I mean, it's bad AI because it's all white people and a guy with a submachine gun standing in front of them. I mean, it just looks silly. A bunch of, revolutionary yuppies in their business suits. But anyway, that's what's coming. There is a flood of AI coming in every sector. We're feeling it here already on YouTube. It's going to be epic, and the government will be years behind the eight ball as usual before they finally legislate to contain the explosion of AI and its impact on jobs. There's going to be a lot of jobs lost by AI. But, of course, here we are. Good old Tony Abbott was there saying, yes, come on, let's join the force. The Australians should join the force, the Australian Army, Donald's peacekeeping force in the Middle East. The Gaza Riviera force. Why would you do that? Why would you do that, Tony? But, of course, one of Tony's former colleagues, Barnaby Joyce, was really in the limelight this week because, in case you missed it, and it was very hard to miss, Barnaby has defected to Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party FON. Very Machiavellian of Barnaby to desert the voters of New England that put him in that seat and head to the Senate for the Nats, to go further to the right. Maybe he's just backing growth because their numbers are growing. Pauline Hanson's doing the best in the polls of anybody at the moment because, of course, she's got quite a simple message, hasn't she? We don't like foreigners. Just xenophobia. That's the message. Don't like migrants. They're stealing our jobs. They're stealing our houses. They're stealing everything. They'll probably come for our wives and our husbands next. Those migrants. It's an easy one. Not having to look at actual government policy, just blame migrants for everything. And there you go, Barnaby, off he goes. And they're on the same page, of course, on climate. They don't believe in that sciencey stuff. Not on your Nelly. So off Barnaby goes to the Senate. And, of course, the silver lining for Barnaby is he'll probably be able to do a bit more drinking because you don't have to work as hard when you haven't got constituents, because if you're a senator, your constituent is the state. It's warm and fuzzy. You just represent the state of New South Wales rather than the people of New England. You've got more leisure time. You can take it easy being a senator. Just go from the lower house to the upper house. Maybe fire the pub on the way, maybe. But Barnaby, of course, will bring perspective to FON, whose policies are not particularly sophisticated. But he was the guy that said, Barnaby was the guy that said that gay marriage could damage Australia's cattle exports. So we'll be seeing more of those kind of insights, especially when he's representing One Nation, because they like to boil down the message into very simple terms that everybody can understand. Gay marriage hurts cattle exports. So he's going for growth, going to the Senate, going to the upper house. Well, Sky News, of course, a key part of their media agenda, of course, all week, the ISIS brides. The ISIS brides. Don't you worry, Pauline and Barnaby will be able to talk about the ISIS brides till the cows come home, till the cattle exports come home. They're stealing our jobs, they're stealing our houses. It's un-Australian. And we're going to get the militant yuppies in their business suits behind guys with machine guns. We're going to get everything with AI. Advanced Australia will be flooding the market with this kind of stuff. Don't you worry about that. It's going to be a nightmare at the next poll. But the most recent polls, funnily enough, despite the March for Australia, if you have a look at Cos Samaras here, he's saying that they're all 14 of them or something have been keeping Labor in the same spot. They've lost, despite the xenophobia and the March for Australia stuff, they haven't lost a point. Labor's just holding its gains. The Liberals are conceding a bit. Pauline is going gangbusters with her simple and effective message. Now, elsewhere, our intrepid reporter Stephanie Tran broke the story on Bob Katter getting referred to the ICC for links to weapons companies linked to IDF atrocities in Israel. Nice scoop there, Steph. Bobby Katter, little Bobby Katter. Imagine him at the ICC with his 10-gallon hat on. You might see Albo there because he's been referred to. Bobby's not on his own. Whether they ever get to The Hague, who knows? But it's a good story. But Scam of the Week has to go to Barnaby Joyce for services to Well, he did back Julian Assange. He was joined with the independents and so on to back Julian Assange. We give him credit for that. But yeah, this video is brought to you by our silver sponsors, Optical Superstores and Ireland Optical. We thank them for supporting independent journalism, and we'll see you on the next outing. Thanks for your support. Please like, share, and comment in the section below.